dark academia. This is a trend that's been making its rounds on BookTube ever since last year. Almost every big booktuber has covered the books, the aesthetic, and the lifestyle associated with this genre. And so, obviously, I was intrigued and had to figure out what this craze was all about. So I'm scrolling through Pinterest, and if you type dark academia, the first thing that comes up is just like this dark literature, dark brown library sort of aesthetic. And I'm not gonna lie, it was this aesthetic that really just got me so captivated by this genre. Like the books and the architecture and the clothes that this aesthetic sort of displays is just so beautiful. And the book nerd in me just had to find out more about this genre. Now, the best way for me to understand this trend and the genre of dark academia was obviously to read books about it. I mean, how else was I going to do it? And honestly, I've read a bunch of dark academia books over the past year and honestly the past couple of weeks. But for the sake of this video and for the sake of anyone who wants to get into the genre, I think the best place to start is to read these two books. The first one is The Secret History by Donna Tartt, and the second one is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. Both of these books have identical premises. Honestly, a lot of people consider If We Were Villains a copy of The Secret History, and I don't blame them. Like, these books have very, very, very similar storylines. They are both set in elite universities. They both follow a group of friends who are studying a kind of literature or like languages in a way. And they both have these group of friends basically take their studies a bit too far, in the sense that they get kind of morally corrupted by these studies, and that eventually leads to the death slash perhaps murder of one of the members of this group. And then the kind of mental and moral decline that the rest of the group goes through, that's what these books are about. And both these books follow those themes. Now, if you ask for my personal opinion, I honestly feel If We Were Villains is a better book than The Secret History. Even though this is kind of like a copy, I think it's better. The thing with The Secret History is that it suffers from pacing. Yeah, the pacing in this book is just really off. And honestly, this book is just really long for no reason. If this book was like 200 pages shorter, I feel like I would have given this 5 out of 5 stars. But it just suffers because there is so much in this book that I just felt was not necessary. And also, at the core of these two books are its characters. Like, they are both very, very character-driven stories. And I feel like the author has done just a much better job at exploring the complexities of these characters. Like, she's done a better job of doing that in If You Were Villains as compared to The Secret History. Like, both of these books have morally gray characters and characters who are just like extremely unlikable, but just the way that they are explored is better in If You Were Villains. And that's why I just felt like I felt more. I had more empathy, or just like in general, I didn't really connect with them, but I felt for these characters more in If We Were Villains as compared to The Secret History. But personal opinion aside, if you look at both these books, there are 3 common themes among them, which I feel is what makes them dark academia. And those points are, number 1, they are set in an elite university town. And both books in some ways critique the pressure and isolation that students feel while in these elite universities. Number 2, they have morally gray characters who are all privileged. And again, these books are a critique on the class constructs and the toxic elitism that also exists in these universities. And number 3, there is a focus on literature and the power of words, writing stories, and authors. And what happens when students take these studies a little bit too literally and a little bit too far. So these are the 3 sort of pillars of dark academia, so to say. And to be honest, if you look at all of them, they are quite like dark, for want of a better word. They're quite dark, and they're not really things that one should aspire towards. Like everything about dark academia is calling out the toxicity and the elitism at universities. And yeah, like it's funny how even though we know that it's toxic, we're still sort of drawn to the kind of aesthetic that that this genre sort of displays. We're drawn towards this lifestyle of like education and academics. Like we're really drawn to it, and I think that that speaks a lot about like us book nerds, I guess. We're just drawn towards the idea of how stories and how words just have a general power, and we're drawn towards anything that sort of relates to literature, learning, or academics. And I think that's why we can find the sort of beauty in that aesthetic, even though at the heart of it, what dark academia is a critique of this kind of aesthetic. But anyway, I still find it really beautiful. And so for this video, what I also wanted to do was kind of explore this aesthetic in our real life. And that's what I set out to do. I set out to trying to find ways to capture this aesthetic in the city that I live in, and that is Bombay. One of the things that's common for the dark academia aesthetic is Gothic dark stone architecture. And we have so much of that in Bombay. The Mumbai University area, the Bombay High Court, CST station, all of it has dark stone architecture. They have turrets, they have beautiful columns and gorgeous carvings. While I was filming this, I was also reading Babel, which you'll see me holding in different parts of this video. And it was really a very surreal experience walking around colonial architecture whilst reading a book about the horrifying consequences of British colonialism, and trying to catch a glimpse of this aesthetic that was beautiful but also represents something oppressive, elitist, and well, dark. Yeah, it was just a crazy experience, and I absolutely loved immersing myself into this. Now, if you want to dive a little bit deeper into this genre and you want to understand a little bit more about what dark academia is all about, then here are some book recommendations. The first book is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This book is a historical fantasy book, and it's set in the 1800s. And it basically follows our main character, Robin, who is an orphan. He's a Chinese orphan, and his entire family has died because of an epidemic in China. And after that, an Englishman named Richard Lovell basically comes, kind of like adopts Robin in a way, but like not really. But basically, he takes Robin away from his motherland to England, where he raises Robin and eventually helps him get admission into Oxford University, specifically in the faculty of translators that are all housed in this tower called Babel. Now, this is a fantasy book, like I mentioned. It's a historical fantasy book, and there is a kind of magic system that is explored in this book. But that magic system and everything which is there in this book is essentially either a metaphor for, or it is a direct explanation of the horrific exploitation that colonies faced at the hands of the British Empire. And it is just so beautifully executed. Like when we talk about the themes of dark academia that I spoke about earlier in this video, so when it comes to critiques of class construct, of elitism, when it comes to themes of oppression and racism and just exploitation in general, all of this which like takes place at elite universities, all of that is explored in Babel in a really, really hard-hitting and beautiful way. But at the same time, we also just get a huge dose of history and politics. And the way that R.F. Kuang has just like beautifully woven fact and fiction together to form a story that just feels so real is amazing. If you're someone who comes from a country that was colonized by the British, or just a country that has been colonized in the past, I think you'll find a lot of the themes in this book extremely relatable. A lot of the ideologies and a lot of the things that we've studied about the Indian struggle for independence, I saw a lot of that reflected in the characters in this book, and that is why I just felt so emotional when I was reading this book, and I just felt so connected to the story at like a deeper level. So yeah, this book might get difficult at times to read, but I highly recommend everyone to read this book. Like, it's not just a dark academia aesthetic book. I feel like this book is an emotion and everyone should read it. Next up, we have Piranesi by Susanna Clark. Now, this is a dark academia feels kind of book. Honestly, you have to read about half of this book to even get to the dark academia parts. And I don't want to spoil anything for you guys, because this book is just one of those books that it's better to go into it blind, like not knowing that much about it. So I'm not going to go into the dark academia parts of this book, but basically, this book is just an amazing amalgamation of mystery and fantasy and dark academia. And at the center of it, you have a very, like a highly unreliable narrator who's like sort of telling the story. And it can get frustrating at times because you don't really know exactly what's going on. But honestly, once you reach like that sort of halfway point where you start sort of uncovering the dark academia bits, and slowly you start like peeling the layers of the mystery that this author has just constructed so well, this book just becomes absolutely mesmerizing and unputdownable. Like, I could not put this book down once I started reading it, and it was just an amazing, wild ride. So my only like advice when you're reading this book is just like stick with it. I know it has a very weird beginning and you're going to be confused and you're going to be like, what is going on? But stick with it, wait for it, because you will not be disappointed. Speaking of mystery and magic and dark academia, the next book that I recommend is Ninth House by Lee Bardugo. This book, again, is a fantasy book like Babel, but at the core of it, it talks about people who have a lot of money and a lot of wealth and a lot of power, and how they exploit that power, how they silence people who don't really have a voice, so how they exploit people who lack the kind of power and wealth that they have, and how they keep that power for themselves at any cost. It also talks about like really oppressive and exploitative systems that are in place at elite universities, and it calls that out. And it does all this through the use of fantasy, because the setting for the story is basically like secret magic societies that are set up at Yale University. And so this world is just full of like ghosts and demons and a lot of fantastical like dark magic rituals, and it's just like so much fun to read. I mean, actually, it's not really fun. Like, a lot of really dark themes are explored in this book, but just like it's just a very fascinating world. Again, this book is a little bit slow to get into because the world that Lee Bardugo has constructed is a little bit complicated, but it's also really fascinating. So you just have to like keep reading to understand this world a little bit more. But once you get a hang of the world and all of like the different societies and the magic that's involved, it's just a really like intriguing mystery that'll suck you in. Yeah, if you like Lee Bardugo's writing, you know Lee Bardugo, Shadow and Bone and Six of Crows and all of that. If you like Lee Bardugo's writing, then you'll really enjoy this book because it's like dark and it's full of magic and it's just very intriguing. So yeah, that was my video for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, give it a big fat thumbs up. Leave a comment down below letting me know what dark academia books you've read and what you thought about them. If you have any other recommendations, let me know down in the comments below. And of course, do subscribe to my channel for more book-related videos. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.